So this topic today, as I mentioned, disruptions in the supply chain. What are the security and other problems, and where can we look for solutions? Now, my name is Rinske Geerlings. I've been involved with the OSPAs and Martin. I've known Martin for a while now. I've actually been part of a panel earlier this year. I was very impressed with the series and the topics that are coming through. We're going to talk about something, like I said, slightly different. It's very close to my heart. I spend my time usually doing business continuity planning, risk management, and information security. I'm based in Australia. I've invited some fantastic panel members from literally 3 different continents. So hopefully you'll find some wisdom in each of those directions that you can take in your own day-to-day practice. And I'm standing in for Martin Gill, who normally would chair these events. He's on holidays. He's having a good time, but he's wished us all a very, very good webinar, and he's asked me to chair this event. There's a Q&A button on your screen at the bottom usually, and we would love you to start interacting. When you feel that there's something relevant and that you would like to ask a question about, we would love you to click that button and type away, and we will, during the event, monitor that and make sure that your questions will get a place, and that one of the panel members, or perhaps all of them, can comment on those. So what will happen now is first, I will ask the panel members to give a brief introduction on who they are, where they're coming from. And then we'll have some comments from each of them on the opening question, which is all about the last 12 months. What has been the main source of disruptions in the supply chain, in your view? So I'd like to first give the word to Chris Mahoney, all the way from Brisbane, Australia. Would you be able to first state who you are, where you're coming from, and introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Rinske. Yes, my name is Chris Mahoney. I've been in technology and supply chain now for a long time. My main area of focus has been mining. I've also had some healthcare experience, and this topic is certainly very close to my heart.
Thanks, Chris. All right, Hans van der Sluis.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Hans van der Sluis. I'm based in the Netherlands, in Rotterdam. I'm working as an independent consultant, and I'm in IT technology since 1982. My experience is mostly in maritime, ICT, and data communication, network communication. I'm working currently as a project manager at a container terminal in the Rotterdam Harbor, ACT.
Thank you, Hans. Zalina.
Hi. Hello. Hi, I'm Zalina. I was with Malaysia Airports for the last 10 years. I'm now a consultant providing enterprise risk management and business continuity management consulting to industries, various industries, from automotive to power plants, and that gives me a lot of challenges and experience in terms of business continuity management. So I think I love the job now because it's really interesting that I get to know a lot of industries, the type of different industries, but adopting the same methodology and approach in terms of risk management and business continuity management.
Thank you, Zalina. And Sigur, last but not least, Sigur Santama.
Thanks, Rinske. I'm Sigur Santama, based in the Netherlands as well. I run a company with 20 people working on supply chain, supply network cooperation, and I'm also a part-time professor at the Technical University Delft, also on supply networks.
Fantastic. Thank you, panel. And Sigur and I actually know each other from that technical university in Delft from a long time ago, where I was a student. So he does have a lot more experience than I have, and we'll definitely enjoy hearing more of, especially resilient hubs, a new concept that the world is starting to know, and that actually comes out of the group that you've discussed earlier, Sigur. So yes, looking forward to hearing more about that. Yeah. Now, Chris, would you like to start on the topic of today? So the last 12 months or so, what have you seen as the main sources of disruption in supply chains?
You know, the last 12 months, as everybody knows, has been pretty unusual. Certainly towards the back end of last year, the focus on cybersecurity in supply chains has been raised quite a lot. The integration that's required nowadays between the different parts of the supply chain in order to get optimization from one end to the other, and from raw materials all the way through to the customer, has meant that the data interchange has been a more constant part of that supply chain. Therefore, obviously a point of opportunity for people who want to disrupt the supply chain. And there's been a lot of focus on it, a lot of money spent on it. Interestingly though, in the last 12 months, we've also been hit by the COVID pandemic across the world. And all the work in cyber pales into insignificance with respect to the impact on supply chains as a result of that. With closed borders and things people have never really considered as part of just-in-time supply chains that span the planet. Also, interestingly enough, because people have been working from home, people have had more time on their hands, there's also been an increase in people's focus on malicious activity in the world of supply chains and data interchange. And there's been an uptick in cybercrime. So supply chains become very, very vulnerable right through all aspects of what's happened in the last 12 months. And as people get more time on their hands, they actually become more proficient at doing this. And so you go from the passive, script kiddie through to people who are able to do more simply because they understand, well, they've got more time on their hands. You've also got companies who have got their IT departments being dispersed, focused on trying to get people up and running remotely, and their focus on cybersecurity tends to drop off a little bit. So what we're finding is that it's a perfect storm, and a lot of companies are trying to figure out alternate ways to handle the kinds of impacts that they're seeing in the supply chain right across the board. So the last 12 months has been pretty fascinating, and to see where the globe is going to go moving forward to combat, firstly, the pandemic as things start to open back up again, what happens then, and what happens with this ever-evolving threat of cybercrime. As we move to more and more automation, we actually have to have more and more ways of protecting what we've started to automate.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, an anecdote springs to mind of an organization I was actually dealing with towards, well, when COVID actually started. And because that was all too hard when people were working from home, and if there was a mobile network outage, for example. And this is at a time we should have more security. Just like you said, people have, bad people also have more time on their hands to do crazy things and very bad things. So we should be more focused on security. So yeah, thanks for that introductory statement. So Hans van der Sluis, would you like to share a screen on the disruption potential of the Rotterdam Harbor?
Yeah, well, let me introduce first that I am extending a little bit your question. I'm not speaking about 12 months, but let's say the last 3 years I worked on this terminal. We have seen disruptions, and mostly the keyword is congestion of things. The terminal is congested, is located on a very spot in the Rotterdam Harbor. And this goes wrong. Sorry about that. This is our container terminal. It's located on a peninsula in the Rotterdam Harbor. The large, ultra large container ships from sea enter the port and can offload at several container terminals. But the main bottleneck is over here. There's only one way into the terminal. So when we have a congestion of traffic, for instance, truck traffic or train traffic, the whole logistic operation goes down. If we have a congestion of network traffic, a radio network traffic, for instance, a denial of service by disturbance, all the traffic on the terminals comes to a standstill. And another congestion could happen when there are severe weather conditions. You see this terminal is not behind locks. You can enter here without entering a lock, but on a high tide, on a very large flood tide, then you might have problems here with overflowing. And with high winds, the cranes are not operational. So we have a congestion of in and outgoing ship traffic. So I would say that this disruption in the supply chain for the last 12 or last years is mostly when there is a congestion of something, congestion of a network, radio connection, congestion in the logistic point for train or cars, and congestions due to severe weather conditions.
Yeah, And Hans, you mentioned also about a ship bringing down Wi-Fi or something. What was that
Yeah,
all
well,
about?
that was a denial of service introduced by network congestion. A ship moored next to our terminal, and what happened is that he had 4 Wi-Fi cameras on his system running, and those 4 Wi-Fi cameras just occupied the whole bandwidth of Wi-Fi. And Wi-Fi was also used on our terminal for the automated vehicles, and that's why the automated vehicles came to a standstill. One of my projects was that we have replaced the Wi-Fi, which is now so common in use and so much in use, by a private LTE with authentication on a private owned frequency. So this has been tackled now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hans. And Zalina, would you like to
Hi.
share as well the last sort of number of, well, a year or 2 or 3 years of what sources of disruption?
Okay, basically, I'm based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. So, of course, we are equally affected by the pandemic, COVID-19. This is actually unprecedented because normally a disruption will not last this long. In fact, we are still being disrupted in that sense. So basically, the biggest challenge that I've seen the last 12 months, for even with the clients that I'm providing services, is that for those industries that depends on just-in-time supplies. So all this disruption from the supply chain will of course lead to disruption when you are, adopting the JIT approach of whereby you don't have stock up materials and that sort of things. And the other challenges is that when you have a single sourcing, so when you cannot, when that supply chain is being disrupted and they don't have a robust business continuity plan to address when you are being affected by the pandemic, then you are not able to then source from alternate sources. So, and of course, when you want to source from another source, the cost will be exorbitant. They will be charging you, a high figures, but they know that the demand is high. And again, the other thing that I find that, which is good, in fact, this COVID has shown people to realize that there is a need for a robust and meaningful business continuity plan, because there's a lot of strategies that says that when you cannot access the premises, you can work from home. So that's what practically they were trying to do when doing the MCO or the movement control order by the government. But when they do that, they realize that their staff are not being equipped with the tools, for example, as simple as laptops, or even Wi-Fi accessibility is not there. So the supply chain that you may be disrupted because they may not have a robust and meaningful plan to ensure continuity of the supplies. So the thing that we have to check now, and to me, when this is good in the sense that when we do consulting, they can now learn from the lesson learned from this pandemic to make sure that the plans or the strategies that they put in place in terms of business continuity is to make sure that it's effective and meaningful. It's not just a matter of an academic exercise that you need to have a plan, but whether it really works. So whether your work from home policy have got all the tools and in fact the policy or the HR policy to support that, because at the end of the day, you want to ensure that even though you work from home, you will still instill the discipline and you will avoid abuse from the staff. So basically that's the main challenges that I've seen.
Yeah, thanks, Zalina. And you mentioned the exorbitant cost of alternate suppliers if the main supplier is affected, and what others can get away with. But the other thing I've seen is the due diligence that's completely lacking in those situations, because customers are like, or other parties in that supply chain are desperately grabbing hold of any other supplier that can supply that service without actually doing the normal checks and balances on that supplier. And you highlighted some issues around that, of course, and also the lack of infrastructure that you mentioned that is sometimes available. You might say, let's all work from home because there's a movement control order, MCO, in Malaysia. I remember that term thrown around by the government, and there is actually no infrastructure to work from home because there's regions where people are working where there's or living where there's not even Wi-Fi connectivity, and working from home is not so easy. Thank you for sharing those regional concerns. So Sigur, sorry. Yeah, Zalina?
Go ahead. Yeah, I just want to add because basically this pandemic was in fact when we realized that a lot of areas are not connected via Wi-Fi. We are propagating that we are in the IR number 4, industrialization revolution number 4. But basically, a lot of areas is still working under IR number 2, you see. So that's the reason why there's a problem in terms of connectivity, because most areas are still not connected.
Yeah,
So,
thank you for those comments. Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, thanks, and we'll come back to some of those thoughts later on in the question. And please keep on asking all those questions. I see a lot of participants there now, so please in the Q&A box, please ask those questions. Now, Sigur, would you like to comment on the last sort of 1 or multiple years of disruptions you've seen in supply chains?
Yeah, thanks for giving the opportunity to share the ideas. What we've seen last years is that end-to-end supply chains or end-to-end networks were collaborations of parties based on their expertise. So outsourcing and reducing the added value for one company in the end-to-end chain, but becoming more specialized into doing that. And what we saw at the beginning of the disruption at COVID is that companies stopped the outsourcing activities and pulled the activities inside their own company again. And I like the example of Zalina, where you don't do the due diligence of other alternative suppliers, but people don't do the due diligence for their own organizations either. So what happens is that you created a relation with the supplier based on expertise, and then you say, well, something happened, there was a disruption, so now I stop this relationship and start doing it myself, but you don't have the expertise anymore.
Yeah.
So what we saw is that instead of decreasing the risk and solving the disruption, it increased the risk and kind of exploded the disruptive effect, because production came to a standstill because we didn't know how to do it anymore. And we didn't have a relation with the suppliers of my particular supplier. So let's say tier 2. So it was not only the blocked road, Hans, but there was simply no road between these two because the party in between was doing that function. So I think what we've seen in physical end-to-end supply chain is that not the COVID alone was causing a main disruption, but also how companies naturally reacted based on what's called independency theory. I'm independent of somebody else. They hurt me, so I start doing it myself. What we then did is we said eventually, apparently, we are dependent on the others. So we have to include their resilience into our overarching way of looking at resilience. Not only me, myself, and I, but the network, the ecosystem is related to it as well. And that's what we call the resilient or resilience hubs, to have this end-to-end effect or minimize the end-to-end effect. I think.
Sigur, what other thoughts did you?
Something about the ICT and outsourcing of ICT. The same happens there, and all the examples of people working from home increasing the security breaches and stuff like that. The same happens if I, as a company, have an outsourced ICT activity, and then I do it myself because of whatever disruption. You see that all shitty things happen. Sorry, Rinske, I didn't allow you to.
No. No, I was going to flow on from what you said about the dependency suddenly on yourself as an alternate supplier for the supplier that's down, but also the impact of COVID on, of course, international travel and transport. You had some other examples there of what happens with suppliers that are overseas and how people have dealt with those. And in the I think it was in the automotive industry, you had an example earlier of the dependency not on just a supplier but also on customers overseas.
Yeah, we look at supply networks always to the supply side, but my customer does the same, and then I'm a supplier, right? So moving one step further in the network will give you great insights in how they regard you as a stable or resilient supplier. And we now even change that around, because I have to rely on what customers do and how they react to their customers. So if they're not resilient, then a full channel of me towards the end customers will be blocked as well. And it might be border disruptions or whatever disruptions you're taking. Yeah.
Yeah, it becomes a very lateral kind of problem, and having to look at solutions in all different directions. And yeah, you guys have shared a lot of thoughts already. Now, I would like to have a look at the question and answer from the actual delegates. I can see here a question. At the micro level, arguably, many security professionals may find themselves now revisiting suppliers of manpower, of technology and safety-related products and services, for example, and revitalizing these relationships for sites which are reawakening from lockdown due to COVID-19. So they're actually restarting those relationships. Do the panel see an opportunity at the more micro level to change for the better the way we purchase goods and assets, or will we simply return to our old habits, whether they're good habits or not so good habits? So more at the micro level. Can any of the panel members take that? Who's dealt a lot with that sort of supplier-customer relationship? Would any of you would like to take that question? Yeah, Chris, perhaps. Have you? Oh, Zalina, there you are.
Yeah, because I can understand, because in some industries it's very competitive, so you have to rely on single sourcing because of the confidentiality of the materials and all those things. So you maybe with this new normal that we have, the way that we do things, companies need to change the way in terms of their policy, because it's a matter of changing policy of whether you want to still go on single sourcing. But if you do go on single sourcing, you must make sure that you have a stringent control on that supply chain to make sure that they have in place a robust and meaningful business continuity plan, because there's no point that you have a BCP plan, but your supply chain that is actually a single source to you in terms of supplying materials do not have a BCP plan, so that in that case, if something happens to that supply chain, your BCP may not work, because you will not be able to achieve your recovery time objective because of the failure of the supply chain of your critical materials. There is actually a single source from a single source. And policy must change with regards to just-in-time supply, because a lot of automotive industries will go on JIT, but maybe the policy needs to change for critical parts. You may want to have a certain buffer in terms of parts, because if you go on JIT, once that's disrupted, then you will not have that supply, you know. So that's my thoughts on that. Yes, to that question, you have to, I think organization must look at how you should change the way you do things, changing policies to adapt to this new normal. So, and this pandemic is just a cycle. It will come again. I mean, you have to be to ensure that you are more prepared when the next pandemic is here.
Thanks. Yeah, well, very good point. Actually, the whole asking your supplier at least for a BCP, that may be the new normal. Coming back to the question that in this case Ms. Jerry asked. So yeah, we see a bit of a shift there. Yeah, Chris.
Interestingly, I think at the personal level, people sometimes do fall back into their old habits, but at the business level, I don't think we can afford to. And I think the kinds of risks that we've seen as a result of the change in the global way of working will be now introduced into risk registers. And I actually think this is an opportunity for suppliers, because suppliers who can differentiate themselves through better BCPs, through more secure ways of communicating and becoming more reliable, will actually provide them an opportunity to stand out in the marketplace. So I think there will be a change. It will be interesting to see how inventories and where inventories sit changes, but certainly I think this is a real opportunity for suppliers to start to stand out in the crowd.
Yeah, great point.
I add two more things. And one is an anecdotal answer here, because due to COVID, I start to grow my own lettuce, tomatoes, and cucumbers. So problem. And we eat salad all day. So it's too successful. So I don't think that's the way. Now, the serious part is that we are also training salespeople to do the BCP planning and questions to customers as well. So the dependency is not only to suppliers, it's also on customers. And if they don't have the BCP plan or their continuity settled, I'm at a big risk as their supplier.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And just on another question here that Omolara is asking, the impact of pricing on the dependence on yourself rather than suppliers. That's an interesting angle. If you're in a disaster situation, a major incident, you're of course, you're suffering at some end, financially. But if you do bring your supply in-house of certain services or expertise, you may also save some if you've prepared it well. Sigur, you've done quite a lot on pricing and financial sort of analysis in supply chains and between suppliers and other suppliers, upstream, downstream. Any comments on that in terms of the actual financial impacts?
Yeah, so practice shows that it is the answer goes the other way around. So one of the reasons to start the outsourcing relationship with suppliers is that they have larger volume, other markets, better expertise, we call it learning cycles, and therefore they are lower in price. And as the processes are connected to each other, the process cost of having this relationship is low as well. And we think, so that's typical answer from, sorry, Anna-Laura, this is a typical answer from the independence theory, is that if I do it myself, once it is disrupted, it will be lower at cost. And you see the opposite, because I don't have the expertise anymore, and I don't have the processes in place. So I have to, well, start all over again as a newbie to the business. So I have lots of failure costs and learning costs and everything. So you see the opposite. So keeping your supplier alive and keep their processes and learning curve alive ends up to be cheaper or lower cost during disruptions as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Sigur. Sounds like a way forward, and also have more collaboration between suppliers going forward rather than the us and them type approach, where we often think, oh, well, we had a contract with you. You're a supplier. You should have responded within 3 hours and helped us first. But if they're also flooded or COVID, affected, all those assumptions go out the window. Yeah, Hans, I wanted to ask, and also just in terms of the solutions that we can think about here. You've done quite a lot of that work on ICT in that Rotterdam harbor, in the biggest harbor of Europe, I understand. Any directions you've seen people take in terms of solutions for these disruptions that we discussed earlier?
I think it's the same thing Sigur already said. He uses the word resilient hubs. My keyword is create a redundancy. You have to introduce redundancy. I think English is about the same. And that is the solution to, I would say all the problem, but redundancy is a solution, is a good solution. We spoke about the network which was disrupted. Now, we have moved from the unlicensed Wi-Fi frequency to a new network, and we created a complete new network with redundant hardware. So actually we created two networks. So we have a network with one frequency covering the whole area, and a network with another frequency covering the whole area. Now, well, this is of course a more dear solution, but everybody say, yeah, well, it never happens that one part of the network will go down, and those masts are so solid. But what happened after half a year? There was a truck that ran into one of the masts, so half the network went down. But luckily we had another network which covered also the complete terminal. So although we had some damage on one mast, and luckily no personal damage, only hardware, but because of a redundant solution, the network was still operational. So that's one of the solutions to create. And another, I said also in the bypass, is that not using any more unlicensed frequencies. Do procure a frequency from, in the Netherlands, it's the telecom consultant, Agentschap Telecom, and you have a licensed frequency. You can rely on the frequency, and if it's disturbed, then you can call Agentschap Telecom, and they will come and fix it for you. If you use a public frequency like Wi-Fi and it's disturbed, well, you have a problem, because you have to ask the other person, so, well, go away, shut down your Wi-Fi, otherwise my terminal won't work. So those two things are redundancy and go off non-licensed to licensed frequencies.
Yeah, so there's some of the what if type thinking that are now instilled in people. I often actually, because I do business continuity planning for most of my days, and the first question I ask people is, after they'd all sent their staff home and set themselves up with laptops and headsets and whatnot, I said, okay, that's all sounding great, but what if the internet goes down tomorrow? And I live in Australia, and that internet has gone down in my 20 years probably at least 40 times, like countrywide or statewide, you know. So it's not Godzilla, it's not meteor attacks. I'm talking the internet going down. It's something that can happen very easily on any day, and it has happened many times. And many of my clients, they would be staring at me virtually, you know, via Zoom, and going, and literally I would say, what if this meeting is now disconnected because something's happened to the internet? How well are you prepared to deal with your customers, with your suppliers, with your staff, with your next of kin, everybody else? And the answer was really, yeah, well, we basically keeping our fingers crossed that it doesn't happen right now, because now we're so reliant on internet because our staff are working from home. So yeah, the what if thinking has certainly, I think, started with many organizations due to COVID. But we need to extend that beyond the, oh, we're working from home. I mean, there could be other disruptions, as you mentioned. Well, all of you actually mentioned other disruptions like severe weather, internet going down, congested Wi-Fi networks, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, very good point. In terms of the solutions and the directions of thinking about solutions for some of these disruptions, Zalina and I guess the other panel members after that as well, have you got any other thoughts on where we could go with making the world better when it comes to these resilient hubs, etc., and creating those?
I think we have to embrace that this is going to be the new normal. Things are not going to be the same anymore again. So like working from home actually is something that is the first option rather than working at the office, because it used to be the other way around. You know, do you really need to go physically to another site to attend a meeting when you can actually do it online? But doing that, you must make sure that you have a dedicated, a secured line. So maybe a company should develop their own, conference call platform, which is more secure. And in terms of when you do that, whether you have you allow staff to access data in the servers, and if that is being done, how secure is the laptops that is being done, that is being used in the house. So solution-wise is that company must think about the budget that they have to think about for next year or the coming years. It's not more on physical infrastructure, but more on network infrastructure. So the budget should shift from physical rather than just offices and buildings. You should shift to building network and network infrastructure. So that's where this normal is bringing us to. Actually, nature is telling us to embrace and gravitate the use of technology. We are saying that we are now 4.0 IR, but basically a lot of us are still working as if we are in still 2.0 in fact. So a lot of things are still being done manually. So I think the solution is embrace it, try to adapt to this new norm, and how best you can create opportunity out of this disruption and the lesson learned from this pandemic.
Yeah, and you mentioned also in terms of collaboration, because I work a lot with supply chain partners or elements of the supply chain, I should say, some of the players who say, well, who should initiate this type of discussion? You know, how should we map out an entire supply chain from our perspective, but also from the others in that sort of realm? How do we manage that? Who should initiate that type of discussion? You mentioned that, with some of the airport discussions in the past, there would be a control room where you guys just invited everybody to make sure there was no, did you say no empty airlines, aircraft seats, but also no baggage that was not, actually transported? So.
When I was with Malaysia Airports implementing the business continuity, because airport basically is only providing premises, the facilities, but there are other external stakeholders that runs that facilities, for example, immigration, customs, airlines. So you can have the airports authority, like Malaysia Airports, you can develop your own BCM, but you need to involve the external stakeholders, because in order to make your BCP effective, you need them to ensure that, for example, if the terminal is not accessible due to whatever reason, you have to go to alternate terminal. But whether immigration is ready to have a mobile device to alternate site, whether airlines policy suits your BCP, because we do not want to have the case whereby you move to the alternate site and you activate that, but you see that flights are flying off without the passenger and without the bags. So we want to make sure that it's all seamless, it's all integrated, so that you want to make sure that you call all these external stakeholders to ensure that their BCP plan is aligned to your business continuity plan. So that facilitation and engagement need to be done to make sure that, because this is unlike risk management is all about you managing your own risk. But when you talk about developing business continuity management, you need to involve external stakeholders, because you cannot be doing it on your own. You need the support from the rest.
Could I add something to Zalina as well? In the Netherlands, the biggest airport had a disruption on the 27th of July. And that disruption was the whole airport came to a standstill because there was no fuel for the aircrafts anymore. So the business continuity planning of the fuel supplier should be aligned to the airport as well.
That's exactly what I'm trying to say, because that's where when you do not get involved the stakeholders, then it doesn't make, your BCP will not work, because the fuel is being supplied by another supplier, your supply chain. So basically all this, especially in an airport where you have all the stakeholders working together to run that airport. Without immigration, without airlines, without customs, and without the fuel, the airport cannot operate. So that engagement needs to be done.
I can see here a question, many plans from Gert Kogenhop, sounds very Dutch to me. Many plans are scenario-based, so a plan for power outage, IT disruption, no access to buildings, etc. Should we move to a more general approach and a kind of salad bar with different aspects, so we can pick and choose from options, like cherry picking based, like sort of continuity provisions in that regard? Have you seen that sort of thing, Chris? Have you seen that sort of thing in the mining sector as well, where there was more collaboration and more, hey, if this goes down, there's other, multiple forms of recovery or continuity by any chance? Is there more collaboration in that regard?
There certainly is more collaboration. I'm not sure if we necessarily describe it as a salad bar, but certainly right across the industry, what we're seeing is there's a lot more discussion and understanding and comprehension of the impact of one part of the business on the other, where in mining in particular, there's a big push on raw materials, getting it out of the ground and getting it off the site, without necessarily an appreciation of all the things that go along with that to support that primary supply chain through the business. So we're seeing that there's a lot more understanding of the impact of the different parts of the business. So when we're looking at things like continuity planning, there is elements of it that span right across the entire business. And the war rooms now are set up in a very different way to what they were before. And there is key representation from a lot more diverse areas now.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Sigur, I'm sure with Resilient Hubs and the work you've done in there, there'll be many, many examples of how to initiate that sort of end-to-end collaboration, wouldn't there? Would you like to share some?
Yeah, so I would like to pick up the disruption of an airport brought up by Hans. I know examples from other airports, and then the airport authority said, well, I can't help it because of this ICT or kerosene supplier is not functioning well. I can't help it that we are down. So my simplest answer to how do you start this resilient hub thinking and collaboration thinking is start with yourself. And if something happens in the chain and you can't provide your own value to the end customer anymore, say, hey, I'm responsible for everything that happens, because collectively we add the value to, in this case, passengers. So my simplest answer still is start with yourself and change your way of thinking from the independent from others to dependent with other. And as Chris said, the collaboration with other is producing the value add for the end customer. So, and then the next step would be start with one supplier. It's how you eat an elephant, with small bites. So do them one by one. There's no, I don't see any good examples of people wanting to change the world at once with small initiatives. I think Mandela said something like that as well, by the way.
Mandela.
I looked that one up.
Oh, no, it's
Perhaps
similar,
I
very
can add
similar to
something
that.
on the one supplier topic. In a container terminal, those container terminals are already very old for ICT terms. They are running for 30 years, and container cranes, the ship-to-shore cranes, do have a life cycle from 30 years. So after 30 years, they are out of service, midlife after 15 years perhaps. But mostly, and for the terminal I'm working on, there are a few suppliers, and there's even the Siemens is a big supplier. So one terminal is completely Siemens, the other terminal is completely ABB, and I think there are perhaps two more, but then the world is gone for suppliers for SCADA systems, for container turns. So you cannot switch to another supplier and say, well, I don't like the due diligence of this supplier, but yeah, well, we say Siemens won't go broke and ABB won't go broke. So luckily we have two, but still one terminal is completely Siemens, and you cannot introduce something else. So yeah, it's hard to get multiple vendors on a complex terminal like this.
But I guess the answer to that is if you can't have multiple vendors, and there's quite a few delegates I can see here from East Africa and other regions where there is just no alternate way of supplying. And I've worked in those regions before where I said, oh, we'll just get another internet supplier. And they stared at me and said, there is none. There's one piece of string into this city, which has about 20 million people, and that's it. If that piece of string goes down at that particular hub in the city, that's the end of it for a while, you know. So the answer to that might be, in my field, we would call that business continuity planning, and talking to your primary supplier, you know, about the fact that there are no alternates and that you heavily rely on them, and make that integrated kind of approach for business continuity planning, and discuss that as a group. And like I said, not with the them and us type attitude, but actually saying we are all there to serve a customer. You know, how can we do our bit? And that's what Sigur, I guess, was saying. I wanted to ask Sigur as well, you mentioned the resilient hubs. Is there like a website or a source of the university where people who are actually listening and they want to know more about some of the guidelines or best practices, is there some sort of source where they can go? Is that already there?
That would be the Risk Institute, Rinske, at the TU Delft. That's the one I know where we're working on it. They have their international contacts as well on the subject.
TU, as in Technology University, TU Delft,
yes.
Risk Institute. Okay, if
yes.
people Google that, they'll probably find some information. Because those who are in those sectors, I'm sure they're looking for some guidelines on this. Yeah. You also mentioned, and this will probably be the last point I'd like to highlight, the local suppliers rather than global or international suppliers for some solutions. Is that perhaps another solution direction?
Question to me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and then that refers to an earlier question you asked. We're working on, we call that to reduce the width of the network, so make the distance between all the companies smaller or regional. And then in that particular way, we increase dependency on certain suppliers. So the Siemens example of Hans would mean embrace Siemens because you're dependent, so make them part of your business model instead of make them a supplier. So that's a mind thing as well. So we make the network smaller and don't have this very long distribution, one road kind of, or one seaway kind of dependency, apart from all the environmental effects, of course, but make it smaller and therefore have more, create more value based on this dependency and have more expertise in. Means that you still have to bring in raw products from other areas, so you can't do it all the way. But there's a nice example, and the ones that want to have a look into it is called the Toyota model. And in particular, you asked about the automotive industry and Toyota. After World War II and let's say 20 years after, they used this particular model because they didn't have the power to get it from long distance sources. So they built it around their own integrator and had all these suppliers in the neighborhood, tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers.
Thanks, Sigur. Yeah, fantastic. We are getting close to the end. I wanted to ask each panel member to give a final 30-second thought on the topic. If there's any advice or any keywords you'd like to give the audience Who would like to take the first opportunity there?
I'll jump in then.
Okay.
Chris, there you are.
Sorry, just beat you, Sigur. Realistically, I think the focus now is that we need to understand that our supply chain is bigger than just us, and that understanding the threats to our suppliers and to our customers become an important part of everything that we do. And understanding how best to protect that and how to work with people who have got a like-minded approach with respect to this kind of change in paradigm will really help a lot of companies now start to move to that post-COVID era where they can start to look at a more streamlined, optimized, shorter, and perhaps more the classic win-win as opposed to the theoretical win-win, which just means we beat up our suppliers. So, you know, I think there is some positives that we can see coming out of this.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Sigur, you were about to say something there.
My advice would be add BCP to your procurement and sales talks.
Yes, thank you so much. Perfect.
Can be longer.
That's the ideal summary of that. Zalina?
Okay. Yeah, to me, you can have the best BCP plans, but the most important thing to do is to test, conduct integrated simulation. I've done that before when I was in Malaysia airports, where I call all the stakeholders involving 600 people, about 600 people from airlines, custom, immigration. So basically, when you want to test your BCP, because it involves external stakeholders, test with all the rest of the supply chain. Then you will see, of course, this is a bit tedious and quite difficult to conduct, but it's worth the effort to conduct a live simulation, an integrated live simulation with all your external stakeholders, internal and external, to make sure that it's actually effective.
Yeah, integrated testing. Fantastic. Hans, last but not least.
What my final word would say is exchange your experiences with companies around you. Normally we see companies, other terminals as our competitors, but in the Rotterdam Harbor there's an initiative that all the companies come together in a cyber port cafe, and we discuss once in a month the discussions like how did you solve your problems, and when you join together you can make a more severe statement to, for instance, the government. And if you want to have licensed frequencies, one company asks it, they say no. But if the whole Rotterdam Harbor, 50 companies ask it, then you have more pressure power. So my final station will discuss your issues with other companies in the same branch or in the same environment. Well, sometimes people are scared to say what they have done wrong, but well, you have to learn from your faults. So yes, and I fully agree with Zalina. Do business continuity planning, and we do regular exercises 5 times a year, and we find things and we can solve them after we have found those things. And if you don't test, you won't find them.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the panel members. I believe we have some final thoughts to share. And also thank you to the audience for asking some really interesting and prompting questions. So that was our topic today. And as we mentioned earlier, a recording will be made available tomorrow, I believe, by the OSPAs. And there will also be a blog, an article actually coming out. So stay tuned for that. You can find that on the ospas.com if you then click on the Thought Leadership webinar series. That's, I think, the final thoughts. You can see here also a little bit about the awards, that the Outstanding Security Performance Awards. If you work in security or a related field, you might want to have a look into this. There's actually 12 different countries now connected to this. I'm the proud award finalist nominee of one of these in Australia, that was. But you can see there's lots of countries where these awards apply. So if you believe that there's someone around you who does a fantastic job in security or risk, please get in touch and let them have a look at these awards and nominate them. So once again, thanks to the OSPAs for hosting, and also I wanted to highlight the next upcoming webinars. Next week actually links a little bit to what one of the panel members was sharing about experience of the healthcare sector and around security issues. That's actually the next seminar that's coming out. That's on Tuesday. And you can see here the topics of the next couple of weeks. So if you stay in touch, stay on the mailing list, and join for a few other ones in the future. So once again, thanks. And I hope everyone has a safe and non-disrupted rest of the week and weekend.
Thank you.
Hi,
Bye.
thank you.